Let them taste the triple guns.
Aye, Captain.
These weapons seem utterly ludicrous, but do have some historical precedence. The Davy Jones Cannons are basically three types of cannons, combined into one. Multi-barreled cannons, repeating cannons, and chaser guns. But were never merged into anything like those aboard a Dutchman. One of the big issues of period firearms was their low reload speed. You had to insert powder, wad, shot and wad into the muzzle, ram it home, put powder in the vent, and ignite it. Sometimes you wanted to lay down more fire in rapid succession, either by firing rapidly or firing a lot at once. It was very common to load and fire multiple projectiles, a scattering shotgun round, or even 2 or 3 cannonballs. But it would have been more powerful to add 3 separate barrels or a barrel with multiple chambers, each containing a load of shot. Jones's triple guns were most likely inspired by the triple guns of Louis XIV. In 1704, the King of France ordered 50 of these pieces for blasting his English enemy, not on the open ocean, but on land. Specifically, they seem to have been battalion guns. These were lighter pieces, usually 6-pounders, attached to a battalion of infantry, marching and firing with them. The 50 or so triple guns were a bit different from regular battalion guns. Whilst you might want to call them triple-barreled, they aren't actually 3 barrels combined into one, but a single barrel cast with 3 bores. The correct term is triple-bored, and an English eyewitness called them 3-bored field pieces. Casting it in a single piece made it safer and more stable than grafting 3 separate barrels together, but it required more metal. As a result, it was heavier, which seems counterintuitive to guns that were supposed to be light and mobile. Each bore was cast to fire a 5.5-pound ball, more or less the standard caliber for a battalion gun. The chambers of these bores terminated in a spherical shape, separated from the front by a constriction, think like a bottleneck. When the gun was loaded, powder was inserted in the spherical end, followed by a cannonball mounted in a conical sabot, or sabot. The cone got stuck in the constriction. I'm not entirely sure why they did this, maybe as a safety measure, or as a means to avoid loading with wad. A wad was necessary to pack the powder and ball tightly together, and ensure a more powerful shot. All of the bores had their vents connected to a single pan, meaning that the barrels could be fired separately or all at once. But they did not rotate. However, a drawing of the cannon does show a cranking mechanism with a rope. It was used for elevating the barrel. It is interesting to compare these stationary bores to the rotating ones aboard the Dutchman. Of course, the Dutchman's triple guns rotate because it looks cool, but trying to rationalize Hollywood logic, you probably wouldn't have added rotating barrels to improve rate of fire, but accuracy. The topmost cylinder is always going to be more accurate, since the master gunner is able to sight along and align it properly. So by rotating the barrel to always have the top cylinder in place, you could ensure more accuracy. If you wanted rapid fire, the French 3-bores could be fired as quickly as you could bring a flame to the 3 vents. Never mind the recoil after firing each charge. Not to mention how complicated and unreliable it would be to add a rotating mechanism to a gun of this size. Now, we're going to look at some revolving mechanisms later on. Each of the triple guns had a unique name, inscribed into the barrel. We have 3 surviving examples. These were named Les Volcans, the Volcanoes, Les Trois Foudres, the 3 Thunderbolts, Les Trismegistes, the Fates. They had further inscriptions. Ultima ratio regum, the last argument of kings, a common artillery description. Pluribus nec impar, the motto of Louis XIV, roughly meaning not unequal to many. And finally, the names of the 2 figures most involved in their production. Louis Auguste, Duc de Maine, and Mifim Figar Augustin invenit. Brother Jacob Maria Figari invented this. Giacomo Maria Figari, an Augustinian priest of Venetian origin, master of theology, and self-described master of military arts. Sounds trustworthy? He manufactured several of the pieces in 1703, conducting the first trial in November of that year. The Duke of Men was very impressed by the show of fireworks, and since he was Grand Master of Artillery, I guess it also didn't help that he was Louis XIV's favorite bastard, he ordered 50 of them for the coming campaign. Figari was to be paid 50 livres for each gun, and enough to cover his expenses. The 3 bores were regarded as a state secret. They were covered and concealed just before their immediate use on the battlefield. However, in spite of their successful trials, in practice, they do not seem to have been especially effective. When they were first used at the Battle of Armouries in 1706, Captain Peter Drake remarked how the French fled with great precipitation, like frightened sheep. They were used again at the Battle of Winnendale in 1708, again to little effect. During both engagements, 3 bores were taken as trophies. They are now held at various museums in England. 2 of them were sadly damaged in a fire in 1841. The flaws of the 3 bores might not have been with their unique design per se, their chambers or repeating fire, but simply the fact that battalion guns were not especially effective. The tactic was somewhat archaic by the early 18th century, and was more or less abandoned when the war concluded. Larger field artillery, deployed in the backlines, was more effective. Battalion guns were supposed to be light and mobile, so it certainly didn't help that the 3 bores were much heavier than average. Triple guns were not a new invention, and Figari had possibly been inspired by the triple gun illustrated by Leonardo da Vinci. His gun had 3 separate barrels mounted horizontally on a wooden carriage, and these types of pieces were quite common for short-range warfare, known as organs or volley guns, but they usually had smaller barrels, often musket-sized. The strangest of them is this piece, designed in the early 16th century by a Frenchman, Peter Boude. He was invited by Henry VIII and cast an architectural column out of bronze with 3 separate bores. It seems to have been loaded from the breech, which would have improved the rate of fire. Breech-loaded cannons were common enough in the Renaissance and late Middle Ages, but were phased out when new casting techniques allowed for the production of safer and more powerful muzzle-loaded iron guns. The column gun was sadly damaged in the fire of 1841, and I do not know if it ever saw combat. Boude spent most of his work casting bells and monuments, so this piece seems to have been an experiment or side project. An improved triple gun was apparently made in Stockholm in 1708. The barrels were mounted horizontally, and it could be rapidly loaded with a special triple powder loader. There is apparently an image of it at the Royal Museum, but I haven't found it. There doesn't seem to have been any large, repeating artillery pieces before the 19th century and, the Hotchkiss cannon. Nor is it certain how Jones's triple guns actually operate. Lots of reasons why they're concealed in the indefinite darkness of the gun ports. It looks cool, and it meant the filmmakers didn't have to figure out a mechanism, or make the mechanism look good. If you wanted to make a rotating triple gun, you probably would have designed it like a swivel breech. Basically, these are multi-barreled small arms with the barrels mounted on a swiveling breech, and placed into the stock of the gun. The earliest of these pieces can be dated back to the 16th century, and are usually triple-barreled, sometimes more. The breech of each barrel had a little hole in the back, which was locked in place by a kind of pin. To rotate the next barrel, you simply grabbed them, manually rotated it, until the next one locked in place. The reason for this design, like all repeating or multi-barreled arms, was to increase the volume of fire. Of course, there were small arms similar to the previous triple guns. The French one is very similar to a 3-bored handgun, depicted in an Austrian manuscript from 1540. Handguns are little more than a metal tube, loaded with powder and shot, and manually ignited by bringing a fire source close to the touch hole. They often had a hook mounted below the barrel for steadying on a castle rampart or ship's railing. Sometimes they were supplied with 2, and in this case 3 barrels, mounted in a triangle like the Dutchman's triple guns. However, it's not meant to be rotated. This would spill the powder out of the touch holes. Instead, it was used like the French 3-bore, Close range, lots of fire. It is difficult to aim a handgun in the first place, since you manually have to stick a match into the vent. They were often fired from the hip, or by a team. So it didn't matter too much that you couldn't sight along each of the barrels. However, the pistol has a lock added to it. A lock allows you to use a gun more accurately and reliably, but it also means that you can only fire the barrel aligned with the lock. Therefore, you need to rotate the barrels to bring the lock into position, which also allows you to sight it. Each of the barrels has a separate vent and pan, with a pan cover for keeping the powder from falling out. The big problem with the swivel bores was their added weight. The solution was to have a single barrel, but with multiple chambers, that could somehow rotate in and out of the barrel. Of course, there is going to be a gap between the active chamber and the barrel, and even modern revolvers have gas leakage on the sides. It doesn't seem to impact accuracy as much as it did back in the day, but it can be dangerous if you somehow get in the way of them. You should always point away from people when you make gas. There wasn't any revolving artillery in the Age of Pirates, but there was a revolving swivel gun called the puckle gun. Consisting of a barrel, a top-mounted flintlock, a cylinder of multiple shots and a crank, you operated the puckle by first spinning the crank, which loosened the cylinder from the barrel, allowing it to grab the cylinder and rotate the next chamber into position. You then spun the crank again in the opposite direction, to lock the chamber against the barrel, sealing it against gas leakage. Remove the pan cover on the chamber, and pull the lanyard to loosen the flintlock and fire the gun. The system could get off up to 9 shots a minute, which is really fast for the 18th century. So, if you'd combine all of these different design choices, could the Davy Jones triple guns theoretically have been constructed in the Age of Pirates? I do think so, but the solutions for making it even slightly feasible would be so ridiculous and expensive as to make it heavily redundant and flat out absurd. The big issue doesn't even come with the rotation itself, it comes from the mounting of the barrels. Cannon barrels normally have these outward projecting buttons called trunnions, which are placed down on either side of a carriage and locked down. The barrel is then fixed, but can also be elevated by raising or lowering the breech. If you want the barrels to rotate, you can't have trunnions. We can see this flaw in miniature in the swivel breech pistols. The barrel just hangs freely. They're not attached to a forestock like a normal pistol. But it isn't a problem for a pistol or even a musket, since you're holding the grip by your hand, thus adding a counterweight. So, to make the triple guns feasible, you have to make some sort of counterweight which the swivel breech is attached to. So yeah, even though triple guns existed in the period, making them rotate would be extremely complicated and expensive, wouldn't improve the rate of fire, and the only benefit would be an improved accuracy over a regular, non-rotating triple gun. Accuracy in long range was the purpose of a chaser gun, but then the speed added by a rotating barrel wouldn't really be necessary. Not to mention, you still have to load each of the barrels manually, so I don't think it would be a big improvement over a regular chaser gun, to be honest. I mean, you could make it work. It really wouldn't be worth it. It does look pretty cool, so happy April Fools, I guess.
Fire the guns! Fire the guns! Fire the guns!
Oh mate, I think you're confusing him with somebody else. I don't think he ever said that. Oh, I need more rum in me.
Father! Father, water, father! Father, water, father, water, father! Well, father, water, father!
Let them taste the triple guns. Oh, I think that was a much better impression, mate.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into period weaponry, you might enjoy this more serious episode on the swivel gun. If you want to see more videos on artillery at sea, give this video a like and tell me in the comments. Now, talking about weaponry, even historical, runs a risk of me getting shadow banned or even demonetized. And the best way of keeping me alive is by becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. This way, you can also watch the videos early and without ads. Enjoy!